Good morning, good morning, good morning, and thanks for joining us this morning. So, I actually I'm going to touch on a few things this morning. One thing, I see that my audio video is kind of off, and maybe I just have too much going on. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter because I want to give a praise. I've spoken of this many times on the show, but I wanted to. I was speaking to Jay yesterday, and for those of you who don't know who Jay is, let me say this: I went to the Columbus LGBT Pride Parade last year, and I was blessed to meet a young man at the Pride Parade. I met actually about 14 people there, and I'm in contact with all but two of the people that I met last year. I'm still in contact with them. I've also seen two of them take a step away from the LGBT movement, from that deception. Praise the Lord. So, Jay, this is good. So, there was a man holding a sign at this parade. And as he's holding the sign said, homosexuality is a sin. The man, as he's holding the sign up, he has a cigarette in his hand. And we're not getting into whether or not smoking is a sin or not, because even people that don't believe smoking is a sin do agree that it's a bad habit. So anyway, so this man is holding a sign up, and it says homosexuality is a sin, and he's holding a cigarette in his hand, in his hand as he's holding this sign up, and and this young man walks by him, a homosexual, and he says, well, smoking's a sin too, fat boy. And he keeps on walking, and I'm standing in the crowd, and I heard that, and something clicked. And so I pressed through the crowd, and I finally catch up to him, and I said, hold on, let me ask you a question. I said, you said smoking is a sin too. I said, so you know homosexuality is a sin? He said, yep. So we sat there and we talked for quite a while, him and I. We actually sat right on the ground and talked. And from that day forward, I began to go pick him up a couple times a week. We go to lunch. We go to the park. We'd walk around. We'd sit. We'd share. He would share some of his childhood experiences, some of his trauma. And he would weep. And as he wept, I would embrace him, and he would lay his head on my chest, and I would hold him tightly. Well, as I got to know Jay, he had explained to me, and he was 22, 23, I want to say, at the time. And he had explained to me that when he was 18, he made the decision to tell his family that he was a homosexual, and his family said, you're not going to live like that, not under this roof. And so he left, and he went to Columbus, and he had lived in Columbus for 4 or 5 years or so, in and out of the nightclubs. He had dealt with the prostitution part of it, the drugs, the alcohol, all of the things that come along with living in that death style. And no, I'm not going to call it a lifestyle today. It's a death style. Unless, of course, somebody out there can specifically show me any sin that the wages of the sin are life. If you could do that, I'll call it a lifestyle. But if you can't, then we're going to continue to call it a death style, right? So Jay and I established a relationship. Shoot, I would share with him and I would break down and I would bawl my eyes out too. And he didn't have any problem embracing me. One day, about 3 or 4 months into our relationship, Jay called me up and he said, I'm ready to go home. I said, well, you can't. And he says, well, I can if I don't want to be a homosexual anymore, right? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, I already spoke to my mom and my dad, and I'm ready to go home. He says, would you drive me home? I said, of course. So as we're driving on the interstate, I said to him, I said, Jay, so tell me, what happened? He said, you. Not me. Jesus. He said, no, David, it was you. He said, because you showed me that I could have a close personal relationship with a man. And it didn't have to be sexual. He says, you showed me that I didn't have to engage in sex in order to fulfill that hole inside of me. He said, all these years, I've been engaging in sexual activity with men, and it's not, it hasn't fulfilled what I was really looking for. He said, and I'm going to tell you the truth, David. He says, when we first started hanging out, I had every intention on trying to win you back and have sex with you. Wow. So as I'm on my way home, I really got to thinking about that. And, you know, I'd been looking and studying intimacy for a little while at that point, and that's what it is. Jay had a natural, God-given desire for intimacy. He misidentified that desire as an attraction, which means that he assumed or he was deceived to believe that he was a homosexual. Jay could never fill that hole, that desire. He could never fill it. I understand that completely. Years and years that I lived trying to find that peace, that love, that joy, that something that I was desiring, that I was looking for, that I was needing. But I could never find it. And every time I thought I found it, it was just what's it called? A euphoria. It was just the pleasure of the moment, and it was gone in not too long. So Jay is in a really good place, and I'm talking about Jay today mostly because he is excited to give his testimony on the show, and he will be doing so very soon. He is also excited to that he has been doing a faith-based program with a group in the church that he's in, and he's under a good pastor. I've met him, and so he's excited in a lot of different things. And so while we spoke yesterday, he reminded me in December, when I was still living in Ohio, I had came up to Maine. I got my mom and I brought her down to Ohio for the winter so she didn't have to go through a Maine winter. And we weren't there a day. And Jay called me and says, "Hey, can we meet up? I really got to talk to you." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." He says, "But I got to see you face to face. It's important." And so as I'm driving, I'm thinking all these crazy things like, "Oh man, please tell me he's not going back," and all kinds of stuff. And when I got there, he said to me, he said, "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" I was like, "No." He was like, "When we had lunch the very first time, you don't remember what you said to me?" I said, "No, I don't actually." I said, "Remind me." And he said, "You told me, you said, I don't want to be your brother." I mean, you said to me, I'm sorry. He said, "You said, I don't want to be your friend. I want to be your brother." I was like, "What? Okay." He says, "And then you looked at me and said, if for 1 minute I don't think that I can be your brother, I'll cut you loose and I'll move on because there's plenty of people out there that are in need and seeking that something more." He said, "That really hit me, David." He said, "Because from that moment on, I really wanted to strive to not be your friend, but to be your brother." Praise the Lord. And and then he looked at me and he goes, "And so I really had to see you face to face just to let you know that I am your brother. I've surrendered everything to Jesus Christ, and we are brothers." And so Jay has been a blessing. His family has been a blessing in my life. I've been down to visit them quite a few times, especially when I was in Ohio, and spent time with the family, spent time everywhere, really. So some of our best experiences and our fruit, the Lord will show us. You know, a lot of people, they say, "Well, we don't know who we touched," and we don't know everybody that we've touched. However, the Lord will show you the fruit of your labor, because it's that encourages you to continue to press on and do it. So you know that what you're doing, the method you're using is the correct method. Okay. So we had a nice conversation, and so I wanted to talk about that because it's important that we say, "Hey, you know what? I don't want to be your friend. I want to be your brother." That's it. That's all I want. I want to be your brother. My goal is to be your brother. My goal is not to be your friend. I don't care about your likes. I don't care about your follows. I don't care about you sharing. I don't care about all of that. The only thing I care about is that my goal is to be your brother, which means if my goal is to be your brother, that means that I'm not going to stop trying to be your brother. I'm not going to stop trying to introduce you to Jesus Christ through word, deed, and action. Because that's my commission. That's what I'm commissioned to do. That's what I am in your path for, and that's what you're in my path for. And so, but if I get to the point where I see that I'm not going to be your brother, I know how to wash my hands and be done with the situation and move on. Because I may not be the one that'll reach you, but there are plenty more waiting and looking and seeking more. And I mean, I hope that came out right. I got an email last night, totally jumping onto another topic, but the email stated that while I was giving testimony yesterday during the show, that I spoke of AIDS as being a reward or my recompense. And they said, "Well, you shouldn't say that, David, because AIDS is not a reward and it's not a recompense." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, it is. So I asked the person, I said, do you know what reward or recompense means, what the definition is? And sadly, they didn't. They said, well, yeah, it's something that you get that's good. Well, that's not exactly the truth, and that's not always the case. So I figured, let me check out the Webster's 1828 and pull it up and maybe even show a little bit of it and say, okay, so reward, to give in return, either good or evil. So for my good and for my evil, I received a reward, right? Recompense, to compensate, to make return of an equivalent for anything given, done, or suffered, as to recompense a person for services, for fidelity, or for sacrifices of time, for loss or damages, to require, to repay. You see, to return an equivalent in a bad sense. So we must understand that AIDS certainly was my reward. It was my recompense for my choices. Just like, because, and this person also likened, all right, I'm kicking my camera all around the place here. All right. So this person also said, well, AIDS is just a disease like cancer. Well, that's not true either, because you don't get cancer from being promiscuous and sleeping around. You don't, I'm not saying everybody. Well, yeah, I am. I'm saying everybody that has gotten HIV or AIDS in some way, shape, or form made a bad choice. They made a bad decision. I remember the young man, talk about forgiveness. Whoa. And talk about the power of forgiveness. I remember a young man. He was 14 years old when I started, when I recruited him. I dealt with this young man for 4 years. When I got saved, I saw him right before I moved away from the tri-state area. I saw this young man in Walmart, and he was with his girlfriend and his newborn baby. When I looked at this young man's face, I could tell that he was sick. So here I was. I just got saved. I'm in the process of being healed by the Lord. And I get to see the fruit of my labor as an enemy of the agent of the devil, as an agent of the devil. I get to see a young man that I dealt with for 4 years that I more than likely infected with HIV. And I know that he's sick because I can tell. So in the first couple years of my walk, I was in the first few years of my walk, I was I carried that weight. I carried the weight around of not only this young man in particular, but of all the people that I possibly had intentionally and purposely infected with HIV. You know, I carried this around for, wow, about 3 or 4 years before a pastor friend of mine, we were at lunch one day and he says, "So David, so God's grace isn't really sufficient for you, is it?" And I said, "What are you talking about? Of course God's grace is sufficient for me." He said, "Well, no, he's not, because you keep carrying around this guilt of what you may have done and what you did." Wow. That really, really hit me right where it needed to hit me, because I was totally immediately convicted. And I started reaching out to a few different people that I could get into contact with. And I actually got into touch with this young man. And I never told him, I never said, would you forgive me, or I want your forgiveness. All I said to him was that I really want to see you face to face and allow you to see the man I've become and just talk to you. So it was very, our communication was not often. It was seldom. Until one day he said, "Okay, I agree." And when he agreed, I actually, honestly, I thought, well, you know what? This man is going to beat me up. He's going to shoot me. He's going to stab me. He's going to do something to me, right? And so the Lord worked it out where I was going to be passing through New Jersey, and we got to meet. We met at a rest stop on the New Jersey Turnpike. That's it's huge. It's right over the George Washington Bridge from New York City. So there's always like hundreds and hundreds, probably 1,000 or more people at all given times. And so that's where we were going to meet. And I was sitting in a rental, and I was praying. I was like, "Lord, if he hits me, if he shoots me, whatever he does to me, we reap what we sow." Those are the words I spoke to the Lord. So I get out of the rental and I see him. He's sitting on the bench, and I get out and I walk over to him, and I stand there, and he looks up at me and he says, "Can I hug you?" I said, "Of course." Still in the back of my mind, I'm thinking he's going to hurt me. But as soon as he wrapped his arms around me, I was overcome with emotion, and I just cried and cried. And he said in my ear, he says, "I forgive you." And he looked at me. And he says, "I don't hold you responsible for my choices." He says, "We reap what we sow." And I could look up to the heavens and just smile up at God like, wow. And we got to sit and we got to talk for a while. And one of my main concerns was, did I infect, knowing that I infected him, did I infect his girlfriend and his baby as well? And he told me, he said that his girlfriend was infected, but his baby wasn't. So his son was born HIV negative. And his girlfriend, the baby's mother, was no longer in his life. That the truth came out, and he told her that he messed around with other men, and that's how he was infected. And she couldn't handle that, the diagnosis of being infected with HIV by her boyfriend, who received it from messing around with men. So she was MIA, missing in action. He didn't know where she was. Last he heard, she was on dope and living, that dope life. So he was raising his son, and he's living with his mother. And he said to me, he said, my mom is a Christian. He said, and she loves the Lord. He said, but she is angry and very bitter at one person in this whole world. And I said, well, who is that? And he said, and that's the person that infected her baby with HIV. He says, but it may not have even been you. He said, you were not the only person I was messing around with. He says, but I'm going to go home. He says, my mom doesn't know that we've been in contact. He says, but she's going to know today. And he says, I'm going home to tell my mom that if she is going to lead me to the Lord, that she has got to forgive you, because I do. And I just always remember that trip, because that was the beginning of one of my road trips. And it had me so just overwhelmed that I went to this conference, and I was so full of joy and happiness that I was able to share that with so many people. And then a brother calls me up, Brother Tim. And Tim was trapped in the homosexual death style for many years. Tim knows the whole struggle. Tim was going to end his life at one point, but it was something that the Lord had me to share, that somebody else shared, that one of his friends shared, and it got to him, and it stopped him from taking his life. His story can be read on Laura Perry's website, transgendertotransformed.com. And his name is Tim Robinson. And so look up his testimony. It's powerful. But the end of that road trip was just as blessed and just as favored as the beginning with receiving that forgiveness, because Tim called me up and said, is it possible for you to come through Erie, Pennsylvania on your way back to Maine? Because I really want you to baptize me. What a blessing. And so I was blessed to receive forgiveness from a young man that I infected with HIV. And then I was blessed to baptize another young man. So when people say, hey, how you doing? My response is always blessed and highly favored. Because that's what I am. Because of my Jesus that dwells within me. Hey guys, look, it is my time. So God bless you all. Thank you for joining. I know that my audio video is a little off this morning. My fault. I didn't reset my internet before I began, but stuff happens. I love you all. Peace.